Blood doesn't wash out. Jake Morrison would learn this the hard way tonight, staring at his passenger seat, where crimson stains will remain long after the woman in the wedding dress disappeared from his life forever. But first, he had to decide whether to stop for her, this ghostly figure on Highway 47 who would either save him or destroy everything he had left. That's when he saw her. A figure stood motionless on the shoulder of the road, thumb extended into the storm. What made Jake's heart skip wasn't just the fact that someone was hitchhiking at midnight in this weather. It was what she was wearing. A wedding dress. Once white, now stained with mud and something that looked suspiciously like blood. The brake pedal met his boot. Jake pulled over, his mind racing through every horror movie he'd ever seen, every news story about roadside killers. But something in the way she stood, shoulders hunched, head down, defeated, told him this wasn't a trap. This was a woman in trouble. Real trouble. Through the passenger window, he could see her more clearly now. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with dark hair plastered to her skull by the rain. The wedding dress hung loose on her small frame, torn at the shoulder and stained with dirt. Her bare feet were covered in cuts, and she clutched a small bouquet of wilted roses like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "Need a ride?" Jake called out, rolling down the window. She looked up then, and Jake felt his breath catch. Her left eye was swollen shut, a purple bruise spreading across her cheekbone like spilled paint. Her lip was split, dry blood crusted at the corner of her mouth. But it was her right eye, green as bottle glass and filled with a terror so raw it made Jake's stomach turn, that told the real story. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I just need to get away from here." Jake unlocked the door. "Get in. We'll figure out the rest." As she climbed into the cab, Jake noticed her hands shaking uncontrollably. The wedding dress was torn in several places, and what he'd initially thought was mud on the fabric was definitely blood. Though whether it was hers or someone else's, he couldn't tell. "I'm Jake," he said softly, cranking up the heat. "What's your name?" "Savannah," she replied, pulling the torn veil around her shoulders like a shield. "Savannah Pierce. Or, I guess it's still Pierce." The ceremony never finished. "Where do you need to go?" She stared out at the rain-soaked landscape, rushing past them. "Anywhere but Millbrook County. Please, just anywhere but there." Jake's jaw tightened. Millbrook County was where they'd just come from, a place known for its old money families, sprawling estates, and the kind of secrets that got buried along with the people who tried to expose them. He'd grown up there himself, in a trailer park on the wrong side of the tracks, before moving to Riverside 30 miles south to start fresh. "Okay," he said simply, "I've got a spare room. You can clean up, get some rest, and we'll figure out your next move in the morning." Savannah turned to look at him then, really look at him. Jake was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and tired brown eyes that held no judgment, only kindness. His work shirt bore the logo of Morrison Steelworks, and his hands showed the calluses of honest labor. There was something safe about him, something that made her want to trust again. "Why would you help me?" she asked. "You don't even know what happened." Jake was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "My sister used to call me whenever her husband got too rough," he said finally. "Used to pick her up from parking lots, gas stations, wherever she could get to safely. She wears sunglasses at night, long sleeves in summer. You know the drill." "Used to." "She died 3 years ago. Car accident," they said, "but I know better." His knuckles went white again on the steering wheel. "So yeah, I help women who need helping." It's what she would have wanted. The next 20 minutes passed in relative silence, broken only by Savannah's occasional directions to avoid certain roads. As they pulled into the driveway of Jake's modest 2-story house on Elm Creek Road, she finally spoke again. "The man I was supposed to marry tonight," she said, her voice steady for the first time. "His name is Bradford Kellerman. He's the district attorney's son." Jake felt ice form in his stomach. The Kellerman name carried weight in 3 counties. Old money, political connections, the kind of family that could make problems disappear. "What did he do to you?" Savannah's hand went instinctively to her ribs, and Jake noticed her wince. What didn't he do? But tonight was different. Tonight he tried to... She swallowed hard. Let's just say the honeymoon was going to start early, whether I wanted it or not. As they sat in the truck, rain drumming on the roof, Savannah told Jake about the engagement that had been arranged by their families. Her father's struggling construction business needed the Kellermans' financial backing, and Bradford needed a wife to complete his political image. She'd gone along with it, believing she could learn to love him, believing that marriage meant safety and security. I should have known better, she said, staring at her hands. The signs were all there, the way he grabbed my wrist too tight when we were out in public, how he'd make jokes about training me to be a proper wife, the time he hit me for laughing too loud at his business partner's joke. Why didn't you leave sooner? You don't understand, Savannah said, and for the first time, anger crept into her voice. My father owes Bradford's family $200,000. If I'd backed out of this wedding, they would have called in a loan. My parents would have lost everything. Their house, the business, everything. Jake studied her face in the dim light from his porch lamp. So what changed? Savannah was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. Tonight, after the rehearsal dinner, Bradford took me back to his family's estate. Said we needed to practice for our wedding night. When I told him I wanted to wait, he laughed. Said I was his property now, that I'd better get used to the idea. She touched her swollen eye. When I tried to leave the room, he backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Jesus, Jake breathed. It gets worse. Savannah's voice was hollow now, distant. After he was finished with me, he got a phone call. I was lying on the floor, barely conscious, when I heard him talking to someone about a problem that needed to be handled, about how someone had been asking too many questions about his business dealings. She turned to face Jake fully now, and he could see the fear burning bright in her eyes. Jake, I heard him give someone your sister's name, Miranda Morrison. He said she'd been sniffing around some of his family's construction contracts, asking questions about kickbacks and safety violations. He told whoever was on the phone that the accident had been handled perfectly. The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Miranda had been a reporter for the Millbrook County Gazette, always chasing stories about corruption in local government. She'd mentioned looking into some construction deals shortly before her death, but Jake had thought it was just another routine story. You're saying he had my sister killed? I'm saying I heard him talking about it, like it was a business transaction. Savannah's voice was steady now, fueled by righteous anger. That's when I knew I had to get out. Not just for me, but because if he could kill an innocent woman for asking questions, what would he do to a wife who might testify against him? Jake sat in stunned silence, pieces of a puzzle he hadn't known existed suddenly falling into place. Miranda's car had gone off a bridge on a clear night, on a road she'd driven hundreds of times. The police had blamed it on fatigue, closed the case within a week. But Miranda had been the most careful driver Jake knew. She wouldn't even drive in light rain, without checking her tires twice. How did you get away? A small, grim smile crossed Savannah's face. Bradford always underestimated me. Thought I was just some weak little girl who'd do whatever he said. While he was on the phone, I managed to crawl to his desk. Found his gun. He always kept one in the top drawer. When he hung up and turned around, I was pointing at his chest. Did you shoot him? I should have, she said without hesitation. Instead, I told him I was leaving and that if he or anyone in his family came after me, I'd go to the FBI with what I'd heard. He laughed at me, said nobody would believe a hysterical bride with a history of mental illness. Mental illness? Another lie. Bradford had been telling people I was unstable, planting stories about me having episodes, building a narrative in case he ever needed to discredit me. She looked at Jake with something that might have been hope, but he didn't know I had my phone and my bouquet, recording everything. Jake's eyes widened. You have it on tape? Savannah nodded, patting the wilted flowers she still clutched. Every word, including his confession about your sister. For the first time since Miranda's death, Jake felt something other than hopeless grief. He felt purpose. We need to get you somewhere safe, he said. Somewhere the Kellerman family can't reach you while we figure out how to use that recording. There's nowhere safe from people like that, Jake. They own half the judges in the state, and the other half owe them favors. Maybe not in Pennsylvania, Jake said slowly. But I've got a cousin in Oregon who runs a women's shelter. She's helped people disappear before when their lives depended on it. As they finally got out of the truck and headed toward the house, Jake's mind was already working to the logistics. Getting Savannah somewhere safe was the first priority. But he also knew they had a limited window before Bradford reported her missing and spun whatever story he needed to discredit her. Inside, Jake's house was simple but clean, the home of a man who worked hard and lived honestly. The furniture was secondhand but well-maintained, and family photos covered the mantelpiece. Savannah noticed several pictures of a woman who looked like a female version of Jake. Same dark hair and kind eyes, but with a smile that lit up the room. "That's Miranda," Jake said, noticing her looking. She was 2 years younger than me, but acted like she was the big sister, always trying to save the world, one story at a time. "She was beautiful," Savannah said softly. "I'm sorry you lost her." "I'm sorry Bradford took her from me," Jake replied, and for the first time, Savannah heard steel in his voice. "But maybe now we can make sure he pays for it." Over the next hour, Jake helped Savannah clean her wounds and find some Miranda's old clothes that would fit her, jeans and a soft sweater that swallowed her small frame. As she showered, he made phone calls, first to his cousin Rachel in Portland, then to a friend who worked at the FBI field office in Philadelphia. When Savannah emerged from the bathroom, she looked younger somehow. The wedding dress had aged her, made her look like she was playing a role. In Miranda's clothes, with her dark hair clean and pulled back, she looked like what she was, a 26-year-old woman who narrowly escaped a nightmare. "What happens now?" she asked, settling onto Jake's couch with a cup of coffee he'd made. "Now we document everything," Jake said, pulling out a laptop. "We make copies of that recording. We write down everything you remember about tonight, and we build a case so airtight that even the Kellerman family's lawyers can't punch holes in it. And then we make sure Bradford Kellerman pays for what he did to you, and to Miranda, and to God knows how many other people." As the night wore on, they worked together, Savannah recounting every detail she could remember, Jake taking notes and asking questions that helped her remember even more. The recording was damning. Bradford's casual admission to having Miranda killed, his detailed discussion of how to make it look like an accident, his plans for how to train Savannah to be an obedient wife. But it was the deeper conversation that mattered most. As they worked, Jake and Savannah began to understand each other in a way that went beyond their shared tragedy. She told him about growing up as the daughter of a man who saw her as a commodity to be traded for business advantages. He told her about working 3 jobs to put Miranda through journalism school, only to lose her to the very corruption she'd been trying to expose. "You know what I kept thinking about in that church tonight?" Savannah said as dawn began to break outside Jake's windows. "I kept thinking about this old photograph my grandmother showed me once. It was of her and my grandfather on their wedding day. Just them, standing in front of a justice of the peace, holding hands and looking at each other like they'd found their whole world." "Sounds nice," Jake said softly. "She told me they didn't have money for a big wedding or fancy clothes, or any of the things people said they needed, but they had love, real love, and that was enough." She looked at Jake with eyes that were clear now, no longer clouded by fear. "I realized tonight that I'd rather spend my life alone than in a marriage without love." Jake was quiet for a moment, then said, "My parents were like that too. Dad worked construction, Mom cleaned houses, but they looked at each other the same way after 30 years as they did on their wedding day. They taught me and Miranda that love isn't about what you can get from someone. It's about what you're willing to give." As the sun rose over Elm Creek Road, they had their plan. Rachel had agreed to help Savannah disappear into the network of women's shelters on the West Coast while the FBI built their case. Jake would stay behind to coordinate with the federal agents and make sure Bradford couldn't spin the story in his favor. But first, there was something Jake needed to do. 2 days later, Jake stood in the Millbrook County Cemetery, looking down at Miranda's gravestone. The morning was crisp and clear, and someone had left fresh flowers, white roses that reminded him of the bouquet Savannah had carried. "I found her, Mir," he said quietly, "the woman who can finally get justice for you. She's safe now, and Bradford's gonna pay for what he did. She seems like someone you would have liked, a voice said behind him, and Jake turned to see Savannah walking up the hill toward him. She was supposed to be on a bus to Oregon by now. "What are you doing here?" he asked, though his heart lifted at the sight of her. "I was sitting in that bus station, holding a ticket to a new life, and I realized something," she said, stopping beside him at Miranda's grave. "I've been running from things my whole life, from my father's expectations, from Bradford's control, from my own fears about what I deserved." "Savannah, let me finish," she said, turning to face him. "For the first time in my life, I met someone who helped me without expecting anything in return. Someone who saw me at my worst moment and still treated me with kindness. Someone who made me remember what it feels like to be safe." Jake felt his throat tighten. "You are safe. Rachel will take good care of you. And once this case is over, I want to come back," Savannah said firmly. "If you'll have me, not because I need rescuing, but because I think we could build something real together. Something like what your parents had, what my grandparents had." Jake looked at this woman who had walked out a storm and into his life, who had trusted him with her darkest moment and helped him find answers about his greatest loss. She was stronger than she knew, braver than she believed, and looking at her now, standing in the morning sunlight with hope in her eyes instead of fear, he thought he might be falling in love. "I'll wait," he said simply, "however long it takes." Savannah smiled then, the first real smile Jake had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. She pulled something from her purse, one of the white roses from the bouquet she'd carried that night. "For Miranda," she said, placing on the gravestone. "Thank you for raising a brother who knows how to save people." As they walked back toward Jake's truck, Savannah's hand found his. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a promise that some rescues go both ways, that sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. 6 months later, Bradford Kellerman was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for Miranda's murder, along with additional charges related to his assault on Savannah and a pattern of domestic violence that the FBI uncovered during their investigation. The Kellerman family's political dynasty crumbled as more victims came forward, emboldened by Savannah's courage. And on a crisp October morning, Jake Morrison and Savannah Pierce were married in that same cemetery, with Miranda's gravestone as their witness. Savannah wore a simple white dress she'd bought at a thrift store and carried a bouquet of white roses. Jake wore his father's old suit and his grandfather's watch. They had no money for a big wedding, no fancy clothes, no orchestra or elaborate reception. But they had love, real love, and as Jake's grandmother had promised all those years ago, that was enough. As they exchanged vows in the morning sunlight, both of them thought about the night that had brought them together. A night that had started with tragedy and terror, but ended with the kind of love that redeems everything that came before. Sometimes the worst nights lead to the best mornings. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones who need saving too. And sometimes love really can heal even the deepest wounds, if we're brave enough to let it.